I'm going to try to explain why we need SD-ACCESS. In this case, I'm going to focus on security. So what do you do when you want to isolate traffic depending on your users that are generating this traffic in your enterprise network in order to achieve some level of security? I'm going to use this guest traffic as an example. Remember that you can create a guest access for users that do not belong to your company in order to provide them access to the internet through your enterprise network. So one way of doing it will be creating a guest VLAN, then creating a default gateway using first hop redundancy protocol, and then at your layer 3 part of your network you might want to create a BRF in order to isolate this traffic and the routing from other users that actually belong to your company. And then you might want to inject here a default route into your BRF so these users gain access to the internet in an isolated way from other users. That is one way of doing it. Let's put another example. You want to provide a human resource department access to a particular server in your data center. One way of doing it will be creating a VLAN for your human resources department, then assign a prefix to that VLAN and relate it to it, then create the appropriate default gateways using a first hop redundancy protocol, and then setting up an access control list here in order to protect your layer 3 part of your network. So you will be letting only this prefix gaining access to this particular server. That is one way of doing it. And if you think about it, it is a mess, because if you want to replicate this in several buildings, in several campuses, you will have to do the same process manually, and this can be prone to human errors. Let's see if we what happens if we receive another requirement. So now we need to allow this pair of users access to this particular payroll server. These two users are part of the human resources team, so they belong to the same VLAN, but they need access to this payroll server. These users should not gain access to this server, only these two users. So one way of doing it will be creating some sort of a group of users by assigning these users static IP addresses, and then modify the access control list here in order to provide these particular static IP addresses access to this payroll server. This is actually a mess. We don't have a clear way to create group of users in traditional networks. User identity is based on IP addresses. Manually administering IP-based access control list is not scalable. It is prone to human errors. It makes troubleshooting difficult. And God forbid if you're using VLAN access control list or port access control list, this just makes matters worse. It makes troubleshooting even more difficult. So with the SD-ACCESS solution, in the policy part of the solution, you have something that is known as macro segmentation that will let you create virtual networks within your enterprise network. These virtual networks behave pretty much like BRFs, and they behave like BRFs because SD-ACCESS is pretty much layer 3 solution. So they are isolated. So if a user belonging to a virtual network wants to communicate to another users that belong to another virtual network, they won't be able to communicate at all. They are isolated, and the routing is also isolated. SD-ACCESS also offers you something that is known as micro segmentation that will let you create groups of users within your virtual networks. Each group will be identified by something that is known as a scalable group tag. So in order to provide these tags, we will need to use Cisco TrustSec technology, where every single frame that enters into your SD-ACCESS network will get assigned a tag. And when this frame wants to reach a certain service or wants to get out of your network, that target service also belongs to a group. So you have a source group that wants to gain access to a target group. In that case, you can create a scalable group access control list. So our access control lists are not based on IP addresses anymore. And remember that these given we are not using IP addresses to identify users, user identity can be based on user and password with technology that you already know, because we are going to authenticate every single user that wants to use our network. That's it.